So in this video we'll be talking about the approach and landing. So we'll be talking about 3 steps of doing a landing and how to land an airplane. So basically the 3 steps that we'll be going over are the approach, the round out, and the flare. We're currently sitting at 2,900 feet in the Cessna 172N model, and we're going to be doing an approach on runway 32. So if you look in front of us, you could see the runway. It's still pretty far away, but it's never too early to start preparing ourselves for the approach. So we want to make sure that the airplane is in the landing configuration. So we want to make sure that the landing lights are on, the carb heat is hot, and that we have some flap. Currently I'm only using about 20 degrees, but we're going to increase that as we approach the runway. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the approach and how to do a stabilized and constant approach. So basically what the approach is, it's a way to lose altitude in a nice orderly fashion when we're approaching our runway to land. So how we're going to do that is that we're going to pick a point on the runway, and I usually like to use the runway numbers, and we're going to want 0 movement with the numbers. So we're going to look at the runway from our windscreen, and we're going to want to make sure that the start of the runway doesn't move up or down. That means that we're going to glide directly towards the threshold of the runway, and that's where we're going to do our round out and flare. So that's how a nice approach looks like. So what I'm going to start doing is reducing some power, and I'm going to start going into a nice constant descent at about 400 or 500 feet per minute. And I'm just going to trim the airplane to hold this attitude, and I'm going to keep looking at the start of the runway and trying to keep that 0 movement. So as you could remember from doing power off descents, basically if the runway is moving up in the windscreen, it means that we won't reach it with our glide. If it's moving down, it means that we're too high and that we'll fly over the threshold of the runway. So we want 0 movement because we want to ensure that we do our round out and flare over top the runway numbers. The advantage of doing a stabilized approach is that it generally leads to a good round out and a good flare and a smooth landing. If the approach isn't stabilized, there's the risk of doing a rough landing or a missed approach, landing too late on the runway, or landing at too high of a speed. And we're just adjusting our attitude slightly in order to maintain 0 movement. If you look at my airspeed, I'm right about 65 knots now. That's the recommended approach speed found in the aircraft's POH. So for this aircraft it's 60 to 70 knots with flaps, and I do have 20 degrees of flaps, so I'm going to maintain around 65 knots for the recommended approach speed. It's always important to check these speeds in the aircraft's POH before flying it. So after the approach, the next thing we're going to start transitioning to is the round out. So what the round out is a change from the nose down attitude in the approach to a cruise attitude in preparation for the flare. During the round out, we'll also be focusing at the end of the runway instead of the runway numbers. So we're going to be shifting our vision and looking at the end of the runway, and we'll be keeping that point of focus for the flare as well. And we just adjust the power and the attitude accordingly. So remember, attitude plus power equals performance. So we want to maintain a steady performance. So adjusting the attitude, if we're too high, we're going to pitch down. That's going to result in an increase in kinetic energy or airspeed, and we have to reduce the power. So we just want to make small adjustments to keep that 0 movement and to keep the airspeed within the recommended airspeed range for our approach. As we approach the runway numbers, we're going to start thinking about the round out. So I usually teach the round out to students to start doing it basically when the runway looks like it's coming up to the airplane very fast and there's going to be an impact. So that's when you should really start pulling back and looking towards the end of the runway for the round out. So we'll keep going down, and I'll kind of show you when I usually start the round out. Now this is a different point for every airplane, and it does take practice to get used to when to start the round out. So there's no real fixed value of when it should be started. It just comes with experience in flying a certain airplane type. So now we're approaching the threshold of the runway and we have zero movement, and it looks like we're going to be able to do a round out right around the numbers, which is what we're looking for. Okay, so the runway looks like it's approaching us pretty fast now. We could level off to cruise attitude and we'll just pull our powered idle. Looking at the end of the runway, we'll start slowly pitching up into our flare and adding right rudder because of the adverse yaw. Pitching up, pitching up, pitching up, that nice nose up attitude, and touchdown. So that was basically our landing. We flared and landed in a nose up attitude. Now we'll just look at a replay from the outside so you get a better idea of the attitude in the flare. So as we're approaching the flare, we start pulling back and adding right rudder due to the adverse yaw, pulling back, and we finally stall at the end, which is what we want. A flare is basically a well-timed stall close to the ground, which decreases our lift and enables the main landing gear to touch the runway smoothly. So that's basically it. That's how to land an airplane. It's the combination of a nice stabilized approach with zero movement, a nice round out, and a nice flare. So that's basically it. That's all there is to landing an airplane. Now it does take a little bit of practice with each airplane, but it's definitely manageable, especially if the landing is split up into the small steps. So thanks for watching, and please subscribe. If you want to read more about how to land an airplane, please visit my website. There's an article about it there, and I'm sure you'll be more informed. Thank you.